Neighbor cut down my 100-year-old oak tree for a view. I sued for treble damages and won $350,000. My grandfather planted the black walnut tree in our backyard in 1920. It was a magnificent, towering giant with a canopy that shaded my entire house. It wasn't just a tree, it was the heart of our property and a living piece of history. But when a wealthy tech CEO, Kevin, bought the mansion next door, he decided that my grandfather's legacy was blocking his view of the lake. He offered me $5,000 to cut it down. I refused. 2 weeks later, while I was on vacation, Kevin hired an unlicensed crew to trespass onto my land and butcher the tree down to a stump. He thought he could just pay a small fine and get away with it. But Kevin didn't know about tree law. He didn't know that cutting down a mature hardwood tree is one of the most expensive legal mistakes you can make in America. I sued him for timber trespass and treble damages, turning his arrogance into a $350,000 judgment that forced him to sell his own mansion. Kevin moved in 6 months ago. He was the definition of new money, arrogant, loud, and used to getting his way. He immediately started renovating the property next door, adding a massive infinity pool. The problem was my black walnut tree. It stood firmly on my side of the property line, but its branches extended near his fence line. It blocked about 20% of his view of the distant lake. Kevin came to my door one Saturday wearing a suit that cost more than my car. "Hey, buddy," he said, not even introducing himself. "That tree is an eyesore. It's dropping walnuts in my future pool. I'll give you $5,000 cash right now to let my guys take it down." I looked at him like he was crazy. "That tree is over 100 years old," I said. "It provides shade that lowers my cooling bill by 40%, and it has sentimental value. It's not for sale. Do not touch it." Kevin's smile vanished. "Look, I'm trying to be nice. I'm going to have a view, one way or another. Don't be a difficult neighbor." "Get off my property," I said. I thought that was the end of it. I installed a security camera pointing at the tree just in case. A month later, I went on a week-long fishing trip with my brother. I didn't check my phone. When I drove back into my driveway, my heart stopped. The sky was too bright. The shade was gone. I ran to the backyard. My beautiful 80-foot black walnut tree was gone. Nothing remained but a jagged, ugly stump and a pile of sawdust. The wood, valuable walnut timber, had been stolen, likely hauled away by the crew. I looked over the fence. Kevin was on his patio, drinking wine, enjoying his new, unobstructed view of the lake. He saw me, raised his glass in a mock toast, and yelled, "Much better, right? Don't worry, I'll mail you a check for the wood." I fell to my knees, crying. Then the crying stopped and a cold rage took over. I didn't call the police immediately. I called a specialized expert known as a consulting arborist. Kevin wanted a view. I was going to make sure it was the most expensive view in history. Most people think a tree is just the cost of a sapling at Home Depot, maybe $100. Kevin certainly thought so. But in the legal world, a mature tree is appraised based on its replacement cost, the cost to buy and install a tree of the exact same size and age. How did my arborist calculate a number so astronomical that it made Kevin choke on his wine? And what specific state law allowed me to automatically multiply that number by 3? The consulting arborist, Dr. Evans, arrived the next day. He wasn't a gardener, he was a forensic scientist for trees. He spent 4 hours measuring the diameter of the stump, analyzing the soil, and examining the sawdust to determine the health of the tree at the time of death. He explained to me that in the eyes of the law, you don't just pay for the firewood value, you pay for the replacement cost. To replace a 100-year-old black walnut tree, Dr. Evans said, punching numbers into his tablet, we use the trunk formula method established by the Council of Tree and Landscape Appraisers. We calculate the size, the species rating, black walnut is high value, the condition, it was perfect, and the location. He looked up at me. The base value of that specific tree was $82,000. My jaw dropped, but Dr. Evans wasn't finished. Because the neighbor removed the wood, that is also theft of timber. And because you have security footage proving it was intentional, we are looking at statutory multipliers. I took the report to a lawyer specializing in property damage. He reviewed the footage from my security camera. It was crystal clear. It showed Kevin pointing at the tree, handing a wad of cash to the crew foreman, and laughing as the chainsaw started. This proved the act was willful and malicious. In our state, willful destruction of timber triggers a statute allowing for treble damages, meaning the court automatically triples the base value of the damage to punish the offender. My lawyer drafted the complaint. Base tree value, $82,000, treble damages times 3, $246,000, cleanup and stump grinding, $5,000, replacement of landscape, planting new mature trees, $50,000, legal fees, variable. The total initial demand was over $300,000. We served Kevin with the lawsuit the following week. I was gardening in my front yard when the process server handed him the thick envelope. Kevin tore it open right there in his driveway. I watched his face change from annoyance to shock and then to pure red-faced anger. He stormed over to the property line. "Is this a joke?" Kevin screamed, waving the papers. $300,000 for a tree? I could buy a house for that. You're trying to extort me. I offered you $5,000, which was generous. Now you get nothing. My lawyers will bury you. Kevin hired an aggressive corporate defense firm. They didn't care about the tree. They cared about crushing me. Their strategy was simple: deny everything, claim the tree was already dying, and argue that the property line was ambiguous. They filed a motion to dismiss, claiming lack of standing. They argued that since the trunk was touching the property line, it was a boundary tree, effectively co-owned by Kevin, giving him the right to trim it. It was a lie. The stump clearly showed the tree was 100% on my land, with only roots crossing the line. But Kevin had one more dirty trick up his sleeve. He knew that the treble damages only applied if the tree was healthy. If he could prove the tree was hazardous or dying before he cut it, the value would drop to zero. He hired a shady expert witness, a guy who usually testifies for insurance companies, to write a report claiming my beautiful black walnut was actually rotten to the core and a safety hazard to his children. Kevin's expert produced a report claiming the tree had internal heart rot based on photos of the stump. It looked convincing to the layman. If the judge believed the tree was sick, I would lose the entire case. But Kevin forgot that he hadn't just cut down the tree, he had stolen the wood. How did I track down the unregistered tree removal crew he hired and find the actual logs they stole, proving definitively that the wood was pristine, valuable, and rot-free?
Kevin thought he was smart by claiming the tree was rotten. He assumed the evidence, the tree itself, was gone forever, turned into mulch. But he made a greedy mistake. He had hired a cheap, unlicensed crew and told them, "I'll pay you half in cash and you can keep the wood." Black walnut is incredibly valuable. You don't mulch it, you sell it. I didn't argue with Kevin's expert. I went detective. I walked the neighborhood and found a neighbor down the street with a high-definition security camera pointing at the road. We reviewed the footage from the day of the theft. There it was, a beat-up light truck towing a trailer piled high with massive dark logs. On the side of the door was a faded magnetic sign, "Pete's Tree Removal." I tracked down Pete. He was terrified when I mentioned a lawsuit. He admitted immediately that he sold the logs to a local sawmill for $4,000. "They're still there," Pete said. "They haven't been milled yet." My lawyer obtained an emergency court order to preserve evidence. We rushed to the sawmill with Dr. Evans, my arborist. There they were, 3 massive sections of my grandfather's tree stacked in the yard. Dr. Evans inspected them. He used a resistograph, a specialized drill that measures wood density, to test the logs.
"Look at this," Dr. Evans said, pointing to the cross-section. "Solid heartwood, zero decay, no insect damage. This wood is furniture-grade quality. The expert who said this tree was rotten committed perjury." We had the logs transported to a secure warehouse as Exhibit A. 2 weeks later, we deposed Kevin's expert witness. A deposition is when witnesses answer questions under oath before the trial. My lawyer sat across from the hired expert. "Sir, you stated in your report that the tree was 80% rotten and a hazard, correct?" "Yes," the expert said confidently. "Based on the stump photos, the internal structure was compromised." My lawyer smiled. "We actually recovered the tree. We have the logs in storage. Our analysis shows 100% solid density. Would you like to explain to the state licensing board why you fabricated a report, or would you like to recant your statement right now?" The expert turned pale. He looked at Kevin, then back at my lawyer. He knew he was caught. I may have misinterpreted the photos," he stammered. "I withdraw my report." Kevin's defense collapsed instantly. The hazard tree argument was dead. The boundary tree argument was dead. He was now liable for everything. The judge granted a summary judgment on liability. This meant we didn't even need a jury to decide if Kevin was guilty. The judge ruled he was guilty as a matter of law. The only question left for the jury was, how much does he have to pay? The trial for damages was brutal for Kevin. The jury listened to my story about my grandfather. They saw the photos of the pristine lumber. They saw Kevin's arrogance on the security video, toasting wine while destroying my property. The jury returned with a verdict that sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. They awarded the full replacement value of $82,000. Because the act was malicious, they applied the triple damages statute, $246,000. They added emotional distress and legal fees. The final judgment against Kevin was $350,000. Kevin stood up, his face red. "I'm not paying that," he shouted at the judge. "I'm bankrupt. I have no cash. You can't get blood from a stone." Kevin claimed he was house poor. He'd spent all his money buying the mansion and building the pool. He had zero liquidity. He thought that if he had no cash in the bank, I couldn't collect the judgment. He was wrong. He didn't have cash, but he had a very expensive asset sitting right next door. Kevin refused to write the check, thinking he could hide behind his lack of liquid cash. He ignored the court order for 3 months, but he forgot that a court judgment allows me to seize assets. How did I use a writ of execution to force the county sheriff to seize Kevin's beloved luxury car and ultimately put his own mansion up for a public auction to pay me? Kevin truly believed his arrogance would save him. He told reporters, "I'm house poor. They can't collect. This judgment is worthless paper." He thought having a $2 million mansion meant nothing if he had no cash, but my lawyer, Robert, was prepared. Robert explained that a judgment in our favor was a lien, a legal claim on all of Kevin's non-exempt assets, including his luxury goods and real estate. The first target was simple, his ego. We filed for a writ of execution to seize his vehicles. The next morning, the county sheriff's department arrived at Kevin's mansion with a tow truck. Kevin watched, horrified, as they chained up his brand-new $120,000 Mercedes S-Class and towed it away to be sold at a sheriff's auction. He screamed threats at the sheriff's deputies, but they simply pointed to the court order signed by the judge. This covered about a third of the debt, but the big money, the remaining $230,000, was tied up in his mansion. To collect the rest, we executed on the real property. We filed papers that put a forced judicial lien on the title of his mansion. This meant that the sheriff's department was authorized to sell the mansion at a public auction to satisfy the debt. Kevin panicked. He hired a new set of expensive lawyers to try and file an emergency stay, claiming the forced sale was a violation of his rights. But he had ignored the court's orders for months, and the judge had no sympathy. The sheriff posted the notice of sale on the front gate of Kevin's mansion, officially declaring it scheduled for auction in 60 days. The auction day arrived. It was held on the courthouse steps. Kevin showed up, looking pale and defeated, watching as potential buyers bid on his infinity pool and unobstructed lake view. The mansion sold for much less than Kevin hoped, but enough to fully cover the $350,000 judgment, plus interest and all legal fees associated with the forced sale. Kevin was left with whatever small equity remained, but he had lost his house, his car, and his view, all because of a single 100-year-old black walnut tree. The poetic justice was overwhelming. Kevin tried to save $5,000 by committing a malicious trespass, and it cost him his entire $2 million investment. I didn't try to get the tree replaced with another 100-year-old giant. That was impossible. Instead, I used the money to plant a beautiful new grove of native trees on my property line, establishing a new legacy of shade and privacy. And yes, the camera is still running. The lesson here is simple. Do not trespass. If you live in a Tier 1 real estate market, assume every mature tree on a neighbor's property is worth at least $100,000. Tree law is uniquely powerful because the damage is permanent, and courts are mandated to apply treble damages to punish bad actors. Kevin thought he could buy his way out of trouble, but instead, he bought me a down payment on a peaceful, beautiful future. If you enjoyed this story of legal revenge and high-stakes real estate disputes, hit the subscribe button.